Step away from the vehicle, kid. HOA security, the man in the fake black uniform said, his hand resting on a belt that held nothing but a flashlight. My daughter Ellie froze halfway down the driveway, her hand still on the handle of our vintage SUV. Another man leaned against their unmarked sedan, smirking like he owned the place. "You're trespassing," I said, stepping out from behind the oak tree at the edge of our yard. My voice carried more steel than I intended. Both men stiffened as I raised my phone, already recording. "Sir, this is official HOA business," the smirking one said, his voice sliding into mock authority. "This vehicle violates community standards. It's being tagged for tow." I gave him a slow, cold look. You might want to think very carefully before finishing that sentence. That SUV isn't just legal. It's registered, insured, and sitting on private property. And one more thing. I paused long enough to watch the first man's jaw tighten. "Those uniforms you're wearing? I helped design the certification protocols that would get you arrested for impersonation if a single cop saw you right now. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back." They hesitated. The taller one glanced at the SUV, clearly debating whether to bluff further. Behind him, Ellie inched closer to me, her brown eyes locked on my face. I could hear her breathing, shallow and quick, and every instinct I had screamed to shield her from this madness. I should introduce myself. My name's Michael Harlow. I'm a former ballistics expert and firearms instructor, and I don't scare easily. But this isn't just about bravado. This is about legacy. That SUV, the one these HOA clowns want gone, was the last project my late wife and I worked on together. She picked the color, the chrome trim, even the leather on the seats. When she passed, Ellie and I kept it running like a heartbeat in our driveway. It's more than a car. It's a memory, a promise I swore I'd never let anyone erase. The HOA president, Colleen Durrett, has been circling for months, calling it a non-compliant vehicle because she thinks it looks too old for her picture-perfect neighborhood. She slapped fines on my door, sent emails that drip with arrogance, and now she's sending fake cops to scare a 13-year-old girl. I took a slow step forward, my boots crunching against the driveway gravel. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my property. You're going to tell your boss, Colleen, that if she wants to push this any further, she'll be dealing with the law, not me. And you're going to pray this video doesn't end up on the 6 o'clock news." The taller man opened his mouth, then closed it. They backed away toward their unmarked sedan. I didn't move until their taillights vanished down Willow, Crest's perfectly curved street. Ellie clung to my arm. "Dad, they were really going to take it?" "Not today," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. Inside, my heart hammered. Not from fear, but from the familiar electric calm that always hit right before I took aim at a target. Only this time, the target was an HOA that had crossed a line no one crosses, threatening my family. As we walked up the porch steps, I glanced at the SUV, its silver paint catching the last rays of sun. My wife's memory gleamed in that metal, stubborn and unbroken. I tightened my grip on my phone, knowing this was just the opening move in a game Colleen Durrett thought she could win. "Where are you watching from?" "Because this HOA picked the wrong family, and they have no idea what's coming next." By the next morning, the neighborhood felt different. It wasn't just me. Everyone on Willow Crest seemed to move with that wary, don't make eye contact energy. Word of last night's stunt had traveled fast, and it left a bitter taste in the air. When I walked down to the mailbox cluster at the end of the cul-de-sac, I spotted my neighbor Frank standing there, holding a pink violation slip like it was a dirty tissue. "You got one too?" he muttered, lifting the slip toward me. "Another bogus fine?" I asked, tugging open my own mailbox. He nodded grimly. "Overnight street parking. My son's car was out for an hour past curfew. Colleen's got her claws out. And I heard about Ellie last night. You okay?" I could hear the low hum of lawnmowers from 2 streets over, the faint clink of sprinklers turning. This neighborhood was supposed to be peaceful, the kind of place families moved for safety and quiet. Instead, it was starting to feel like a pressure cooker. "Ellie's fine," I said, my jaw tightening. "Shaken, but she's tougher than she looks. I've already started documenting everything. They're not going to get away with this." Frank gave a weary sigh. "She's losing it, man. Colleen, I've lived here 15 years, and I've never seen her push this hard. She's got everyone scared. That poor guy across from you, He's been hit with 5 fines this month, just for leaving his trash cans out a few hours late. I glanced back toward my house. The SUV glinted in the morning sun, parked in the same driveway spot it always had. It looked so ordinary, so harmless. And yet, Colleen Durrett had turned it into a battleground. "This isn't about cars or trash cans," I said quietly. "It's about control. She wants to make an example out of someone, and she picked the wrong family." Frank gave me a sideways look, like he wasn't sure whether to be scared or impressed. "Well, good luck. I'm not gonna lie, I'm too old to fight her. But if you figure something out—" "I will," I said, sliding the pink slip into my pocket. On the walk back, I noticed 2 other neighbors peeking through curtains. One woman waved, hesitantly before ducking back inside. That told me everything. People weren't just annoyed, they were afraid. They'd all heard the story by now. Fake security guards, a 13-year-old kid cornered in her own driveway. And if Colleen got away with that, she could do anything. Inside, Ellie sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling her tablet. "Dad, did you see the neighborhood app? People are talking about it. Some are calling me a hero. Some are saying we should just move." "We're not moving," I said firmly, setting my keys down. "This is our home. Your mom worked too hard for it. And if these people think intimidation is going to make us leave, they've got another thing coming." Ellie's fingers hesitated on the screen. Mom would have hated this place if she saw it now. She was right. My wife had loved the magnolia trees, the quiet cul-de-sac, the way every house had its own bit of sky. She wanted Ellie to grow up somewhere safe. That dream was twisting into something sour, and I could feel it like a splinter under my skin. As the day wore on, the HOA made its next move. I opened an email from the board, subject line, "Notice of immediate violation. Vehicle non-compliance." The letter was cold and clinical, citing multiple visual confirmations and threatening fines of $100 per day if the SUV wasn't removed. I read it twice, then took a slow breath. This wasn't just harassment anymore. They were putting it in writing, and that meant they were stepping into territory I could use against them. Publicly, legally, this was ammunition. That night, I walked out to the edge of the driveway with Ellie, just to breathe the cool air and feel the gravel under my boots. Across the street, I noticed another neighbor staring at the SUV, shaking his head before heading inside. This wasn't just our fight anymore. The whole block was watching, waiting to see if anyone would stand up to the board. I rested a hand on the hood of the SUV, cool and smooth under my palm. "They want a war," I muttered, mostly to myself. "We'll give them one." I decided to face the storm head on. By mid-morning, I was standing outside the Willowcrest HOA office, a squat beige building that looked more like an abandoned dentist's clinic than a place that ran the neighborhood. The sun beat down on the tinted glass door, and for a second, I wondered if Colleen Durrett herself would be waiting inside with another smug grin. Instead, I was greeted by Mark Ellison. He was tall, slightly hunched, with the tired eyes of a man who'd been dragged into battles he wanted no part of. His tie was crooked, his fingers tapping nervously against a clipboard as if trying to send Morse code for help. "Morning," I said, holding up the printed violation email like a flag of war. Mark swallowed hard. Yes, Mr. Harlow. I saw the report." His voice dropped at the end like he was afraid the walls were listening. Inside an office, the air was stale with the scent of old carpet and faint lemon cleaner. A bulletin board was cluttered with notices, lawn care reminders, pet leash regulations, and a bright orange flyer reading HOA security patrols, keeping Willowcrest safe. The photo was clearly a stock image. The man in the picture didn't look anything like the fake guards who'd cornered Ellie. I leaned against the counter, studying Mark. His eyes kept darting toward the back office door, then to the violation letter in my hand. "You ever have to explain to a 13-year-old why 2 grown men in fake uniforms tried to scare her off her own driveway?" I asked, keeping my voice even. His jaw worked silently. He didn't answer, but his fingers tightened on the clipboard until his knuckles went pale. That was my first real glimpse into his internal battle. He wasn't the enemy, not fully. He was trapped. "I'm here for a written explanation," I continued. "Who authorized this? And why are we being harassed for a perfectly legal vehicle?" Mark glanced at the back door again, then leaned slightly closer. I I can give you the letter, he murmured. But I just follow procedure. You'll have to talk to Ms. Durrett for anything else. His voice cracked halfway through her name. That was all the confirmation I needed. He knew this was wrong. He just didn't know how to get out of the web she'd spun. I accepted the official letter he slid across the counter, noting the HOA letterhead and Colleen's sharp digital signature at the bottom. My fingers traced the edges, committing it to memory. This wasn't just paper. It was a breadcrumb trail leading straight to her. Mark, I said quietly, I know you don't like this. I can see it all over you. I don't need you to say anything today. But when the time comes, you'll have a choice. And trust me, that choice will matter. He froze, his Adam's apple bobbing. For a heartbeat, the office felt like the eye of a storm, silent, charged with something unspoken. Then he nodded ever so slightly, like a man tipping his hat to the inevitable. I turned to leave, letting the letter dangle from my fingers. Outside, the sun felt hotter than before, and I could hear the faint rattle of sprinklers down the street. My pulse steadied as I walked back toward the SUV, parked in its rightful spot. The real fight hadn't started yet, but now I had my first confirmation. The board wasn't united. Ellie was sitting on the porch swing when I got home, her hair catching the sunlight like a little halo. "Did you get anything?" she asked. "Enough," I said. "Sometimes the first crack in a wall is all you need, and I just saw one." I sat beside her, the swing creaking softly. My daughter leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the stirrings of control returning. The HOA thought they could frighten us into compliance. They didn't see that they were creating witnesses, people like Mark, people like our neighbors, who were just waiting for someone to stand up. Drop a like if you've ever watched someone in power squirm under their own lies, and subscribe if you want to see how this small crack is going to turn into the fall of an entire HOA board. That night, the HOA decided to make its next move. I knew at the moment a slow beam of light swept across my living room curtains, first left, then right, then back again. I stepped onto the porch, barefoot, phone in hand, and there it was. The same unmarked sedan idling at the end of the driveway. The fake security patrol had returned, this time with a little more confidence. Ellie peeked out from behind the door. "Dad, they're back." Her voice trembled, but there was steel underneath it now. Fear was giving way to anger, the same way it always had in me when someone tried to push too far. I raised my phone, the red recording dot glowing. "Evening," I called out, my voice carrying across the quiet cul-de-sac. The taller man stepped out, his flashlight beam aimed low but deliberate. "You've been warned," he said, like some bad actor reading from a script. "The vehicle needs to be removed immediately. Board authorized escalation if you continue to ignore compliance." I didn't move from the porch. "This is private property. You're trespassing. And for the record, your board authorization doesn't trump state law. You're impersonating security officers, and I have every second of this on video." A sprinkler clicked on across the street, the sound almost absurdly calm against the tension. My heart thudded in that slow, measured rhythm I remembered from the range, calm before the shot. Or, in this case, before the next move in a bigger fight. The sedan inched forward like they were trying to intimidate me. Ellie whispered behind me, "Should I call the cops?" "Not yet," I said quietly. "Let's make sure the world sees this first." I stepped off the porch, letting the phone capture their license plate. The taller man muttered something to his partner, and within seconds the sedan rolled off, turning down Maple Glen with a soft squeal of tires. The entire interaction had lasted less than 3 minutes, but it was another piece of the puzzle, a public pattern of harassment that Colleen couldn't deny. The next morning, I printed out the HOA's violation letter and pinned it on the kitchen corkboard. Under it, I added a still frame from the video, the unmarked sedan caught in my driveway lights. Ellie studied it over breakfast like it was a trophy. "They're really scared of the car," she said, chewing on a piece of toast. "They're scared of control slipping," I corrected her. "Bullies double down when they feel power slipping away. And right now, they're showing everyone in this neighborhood exactly who they are." Later that day, I stepped outside to water the flower beds under the magnolia tree. Mrs. Ramirez from 2 doors down shuffled by with her little terrier, pausing just long enough to mutter, "I saw the lights last night. You be careful, Michael. Colleen's losing her mind." I gave a small nod. "Thanks for the heads up." It was happening. Neighbors were starting to notice. starting to talk. And the more Colleen escalated, the more fuel she handed me for the one weapon she couldn't control: public exposure. That evening, I compiled the videos from both nights into a single file, time-stamped and clear. The red dots of their taillights glowed against the darkness, the flashlight beams raking across my yard, and Ellie's small voice could be heard asking if she should call the cops. It wasn't just evidence, it was a story, one that would hit hard when the time came. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, I sat on the porch swing with Ellie, phone in my hand. I scrolled through the footage one more time and felt that slow, steady shift from defense to offense. They were making it personal now, and personal battles are the ones I never lose. The morning after the second patrol, I woke up with the same heavy awareness in my chest. This wasn't a spat over a car anymore. It was a campaign. The HOA had crossed a line, and now every move they made would leave a trail. Ellie sat at the table, spooning cereal into her mouth, her tablet propped up beside her. "Dad," she said, "the neighborhood app's blowing up. Somebody posted about the fake cops. People are asking if it's even legal." I poured my coffee and leaned over to look. Sure enough, a thread titled, "What's Happening to Willow Crest?" was racking up comments. Half the neighbors were scared, the other half were furious. And tucked between the posts was one that made my pulse slow with interest. Who hired the security? They're not on the state registry. Bingo. I carried my mug to the home office and fired up my computer. Years in ballistics and firearms consulting had trained me to track licenses and certifications across multiple states. Fake security left a digital trail if you knew where to look. Within 10 minutes, I was digging through the state's online licensing database. Nothing. No company name matching the one printed on the orange flyer. No security licenses connected to Willow Crest HOA. Not a single bond or insurance filing. It was like they didn't exist. I opened another tab and traced the email domain used in the violation letter. A few clicks later, I found that it was registered to a generic LLC located in the next county over, owned by someone with the same last name as Colleen Durrett. My lips pressed into a tight line. So, that was the game. She wasn't just playing queen of the neighborhood. She was running a backyard intimidation business through a family front. And if she'd skipped licensing, she'd stepped straight into a legal minefield. I grabbed my phone and scrolled to the videos of the sedan from the previous night, the flashlight beam cutting across the SUV, the unmarked car idling like a predator. It was all there. I added a slow zoom frame of the license plate and tagged it in my growing evidence folder. This wasn't just going to be a private complaint. This was ammunition for the one battlefield Colleen couldn't control: public scrutiny. By mid-morning, I stepped outside to get some air. The magnolia tree in our yard was shedding early blossoms, the petals drifting like quiet promises onto the hood of the SUV. Ellie joined me, hands in her sweatshirt pockets. "Are we going to call the cops?" she asked. "Not yet," I said, keeping my voice low. "First, we make sure the world sees the truth. If we go too early, she can spin it. If we go with proof and pressure, she can't breathe without it catching fire." Ellie tilted her head. "Like chess?" I smiled. "Exactly like chess." And she just moved her queen into a trap. Across the street, a neighbor lifted a garbage can and gave me a subtle nod. Word was spreading without me saying a thing. The HOA wanted compliance through fear. But fear had a funny way of flipping once people realized they weren't alone. Back inside, I finished compiling a short timeline. First violation letter, first night patrol, second night patrol, and the screenshots of the LLC registration. Every piece of it pointed in one direction: illegal operation, personal intimidation, and abuse of power. The more I stared at the growing file, the calmer I felt. This was my arena. I didn't need to break the rules or shout. I just needed to document every overreach and wait for the moment to strike. As the sun dipped, I saved the folder under a new name: Willow Crest HOA Exposure. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and a thought settled in like bedrock. Colleen Durrett had no idea she'd already lost. She just didn't know when the lights were about to come on. The next day, things got personal, in a way I hadn't expected. Ellie came bursting into the house after her bike ride, her cheeks flushed and her hands gripping the handlebars like she was still holding on for dear life. "Dad," she panted, "one of those fake cops stopped me. He said the SUV was evidence. He told me I wasn't allowed near it. My stomach dropped, a cold weight settling in my chest. Threatening me was one thing. Targeting my daughter directly crossed a line I couldn't let slide another second. I set down the wrench I'd been using to tighten the porch railing and crouched in front of her. "Did he touch you?" I asked, my voice calm but tight. "No," she said, shaking her head. "But he parked across the street and just stared, said I should tell you, time's up." Every instinct I'd ever honed in law enforcement training screamed that this was the escalation moment. They weren't just trying to intimidate anymore. They were trying to break us psychologically. And if Ellie was their target, they'd just made their fatal mistake. I grabbed my phone and opened the neighborhood app. Sure enough, a new post had appeared. Harlow's kid messing with ongoing HOA investigation. My jaw clenched as I scrolled. Colleen Durrett's fingerprints were all over this. Subtle enough to dodge liability, but insidious enough to smear my daughter publicly. I took a long breath, steadying myself the way I used to, before a controlled shot on the range. There was no room for anger and strategy. Anger got people sloppy. What I needed now was precision. Ellie sat on the edge of the couch, hugging a pillow. "I don't want to ride my bike anymore," she murmured. That hit me harder than the fake cops or the violation letters. This home, this street, this neighborhood, it was supposed to be safe for her. It was supposed to hold the memories of her mother, the laughter of summer nights, the quiet pride of the magnolia tree blooming in the yard. And Colleen was turning it into a battlefield. I put an arm around her. "We're not leaving. We're not giving up the driveway, the car, or a single inch of this home. But it's time we make a move they can't ignore." That night, I set up my camera system for full perimeter coverage, motion alerts, night vision, time-stamped backups. My office looked like a miniature command center, screens reflecting in the dark as I monitored the street. I wasn't going to let them sneak a single threat past me again. Around 9 p.m., the familiar low hum of an engine drifted up the cul-de-sac. I watched the live feed, the unmarked sedan, lights off, creeping past my driveway. The driver paused just long enough to shine a flashlight over the SUV, then kept going. I hit record all and leaned back in my chair. Every pass they made now wasn't just harassment, it was evidence. Evidence I would use to destroy this little shadow operation when the time was right. The next morning, I compiled the clips into a neat sequence. I even slowed the moment where the flashlight beam lingered on Ellie's bike leaning against the porch. Anyone who saw it would feel the same gut-deep disgust I did. As I stared at the footage, I realized my role had shifted. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was preparing the opening salvo of a public reckoning. Colleen thought she was untouchable behind HOA bylaws and whispered threats. She hadn't factored in what happens when a trained professional documents every misstep with the patience of a hunter. Ellie wandered into my office, rubbing her eyes. "Did they come again?" "They did," I said, showing her the paused frame of the sedan. "And now they've given us exactly what we need. They just don't know it yet." She nodded slowly, a flicker of confidence returning. "So, we fight back now?" "Oh, we will," I said, voice low but certain. "And when we do, everyone in Willow Crest will see exactly who they are. Drop a like if you've ever been pushed to protect what matters most, and subscribe to watch how this quiet street is about to become the scene of an HOA's downfall. I knew I couldn't topple Colleen Durrett's little empire alone. I needed someone inside, someone who had seen the board's decisions up close, and I already had a name in mind, Mark Ellison. The man had conflicted written all over him the last time I walked into that drab HOA office. And now it was time to see if he was ready to do more than shuffle papers. I sent him a message through the neighborhood app, something vague enough to fly under Colleen's radar. "Coffee at the diner? Need to discuss the security issue." He replied 5 minutes later with a simple, "Tonight." Yeti. The diner was quiet when I arrived, the smell of fried food and burnt coffee hanging in the air like old wallpaper. I slid into a booth near the back, facing the door. Mark showed up a few minutes later, shoulders hunched, tie loosened, eyes darting around like he was afraid the ketchup bottle might be wired for sound. "Thanks for coming," I said, keeping my voice low. He sat, wrapping his long fingers around a coffee cup like it was a lifeline. "I shouldn't be here," he muttered, but he didn't leave. "If Colleen finds out..." He cut himself off, jaw tightening. "She's already targeting my kid," I said, letting that hang in the air. "And I've got video of those fake cops circling our street like vultures. This isn't just a neighborhood issue anymore. It's a criminal one. But if I take it to the wrong person too soon, she spins it and it dies in committee. I need proof, the kind you have access to." Mark stared at his coffee. His knee bounced under the table. I could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Loyalty to the board versus the pit in his stomach every time he signed off on one of Colleen's stunts. Finally, he exhaled and reached into his messenger bag. I didn't see this. I didn't give this to you." He slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were 2 sheets, a signed security services contract and a payment receipt. My heart gave a slow, steady thump as I scanned them. The contract was issued to Durrett Family Services, LLC. No bond number, no license number, no insurance. And the payment receipt? It was billed as landscaping enhancement. "She's laundering HOA funds to hire unlicensed security," I said, keeping my voice even. "And she's hiding the expense under landscaping?" Mark nodded, his face pale. "She said it would protect the community, but she never asked for a vote. She just did it. And now she's doubling down. I don't want to go down with her." "You won't," I said, sliding the folder into my bag. "You're going to help fix this. When this goes public, you're going to be the one who stepped up. Trust me, people will remember that." He gave a tight nod, but his hands still trembled around his coffee cup. For the first time, I saw not just fear, but relief in his expression, like he'd finally cracked open the pressure valve that had been building inside him for months. When I left the diner, the night air felt electric. I walked to my truck with the folder under my arm and a new certainty in my chest. This wasn't just neighbor squabbles anymore. I had Colleen Durrett's corruption in black and white, and Mark Ellison had just stepped into the role of silent ally. Back home, I spread the folder's contents across my desk under the glow of the desk lamp. Ellie peeked in, rubbing her eyes from sleep. "What's that?" "Checkmate in progress," I said softly. "We just got the piece we needed." Outside, the magnolia tree swayed in the breeze, its blossoms brushing against the SUV like a quiet promise. The next phase wasn't about defense anymore. It was about bringing the truth into the light. By the next morning, the shift inside me was complete. For weeks, Colleen Durrett had been moving the pieces, thinking I was just another homeowner she could corner into compliance. But now, with Mark Ellison's folder tucked neatly into my desk, the board's dirty little secret wasn't just a suspicion. It was a fully loaded weapon. I started the day with black coffee and a plan. Step 1 was to lock down the evidence in multiple places. I scanned the security services contract, the payment receipt, and my compiled videos. Each file went to a cloud drive, an encrypted USB, and a secondary email account I kept for sensitive work. Years as a ballistics and security consultant taught me one lesson above all. If your evidence exists in only one place, you don't really have evidence. Ellie wandered into my office in her socks, hair a sleepy tangle. "You're up early," she said. "Big day," I replied. "We're moving from defense to offense." She climbed onto the chair beside me, looking at the screen where I was cataloging timestamps from the night vision footage. "You're gonna beat them, right?" I paused and rested my hand on her shoulder. "We're not just going to beat them. We're going to make sure they can't do this to anyone else ever again." By mid-morning, I had the evidence binder ready. It was a neat, lethal package. Photos of the unmarked sedan, stills from the flashlight sweeps, Mark's contract copies, and the HOA violation emails lined up in chronological order. On the last page, I'd printed a screenshot of the LLC registration, showing Colleen's family name. Each item told the same story: abuse of power, intimidation of a minor, and unlicensed security operations. The next step was identifying my battlefield. I had 2 primary weapons, the local media and law enforcement. Both could make this story too big for Colleen to bury, but timing was everything. A sloppy reveal could give her room to frame me as the problem. A perfectly timed strike could leave her cornered before she even knew which way to turn. Around noon, I drove out to the edge of town, where the local news station squatted between a car dealership and a strip mall. I didn't go inside, not yet. I simply sat in the truck, flipping through the binder, rehearsing the narrative I would deliver when the moment came. A father protecting his daughter, a neighborhood under siege by its own board, a president caught red-handed in a scheme that mixed intimidation with personal profit. When I got back to Willow Crest, the air felt heavier. 2 houses down, Mrs. Ramirez gave me a knowing glance as she watered her petunias. "They came by again this morning," she said quietly. "Same car, parked for 10 minutes. I nodded, tucking that detail into my mental timeline. Every extra pass was a nail in Colleen's coffin. That evening, I staged a subtle show of control. I rolled the SUV out of the driveway, washed it under the last of the sunlight, and parked it back in place, gleaming and unapologetic. Ellie helped me polish the chrome, humming under her breath like it was some kind of ritual. The neighbors saw. That was the point. It wasn't defiance for defiance's sake. It was a signal that the intimidation wasn't working. Inside, I laid the binder and USB drive on my desk like a soldier laying out his kit. Tomorrow, I'd take the first step into the public phase of this fight. Tonight, I let the quiet stretch, savoring the calm before the strike. The magnolia tree brushed its petals across the windshield of the SUV, soft and silent, like the house itself was standing guard with me. Colleen thought she could isolate us, but all she'd really done was give me the time and evidence to dismantle her power from the inside out. By sunrise, I was already moving. The binder sat on the passenger seat of my truck, the USB drive tucked safely into my jacket pocket. This part of the plan wasn't about confrontation. It was about building an undeniable wall of evidence. If Colleen Durrett thought she could hide behind her title and the HOA bylaws, she was about to learn what happens when the truth has teeth. First stop was Mrs. Ramirez's house. She met me at the door in her robe, hair still damp from the shower, her little terrier yapping at my feet. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said, ushering me inside. I opened the binder on her kitchen island and showed her the photos of the unmarked sedan, the flashlight beam slicing across my driveway, and the contract with Colleen's family name at the top. Her lips thinned as she scrolled through the footage on my tablet. "They scared your little girl," she said, shaking her head. "You know, I heard them outside my window last night. They weren't just driving by. They parked. I could hear them talking about making an example. Would you be willing to write that down?" I asked. "Even just a short statement? It'll help everyone in this neighborhood, not just me." She hesitated for a second, then nodded, reaching for a pen. When she handed me the signed page, her hand trembled, but there was relief in her eyes, like she'd finally stopped pretending the problem would go away on its own. Next was Frank, my neighbor from the mailbox cluster. He didn't even let me knock twice before opening the door, phone in his hand. "You're not going to believe this," he said, pulling me into his living room. "I got their lights on camera last night. Thought I was imagining it." I watched his clip. The same sedan creeping past at 2:17 a.m., headlights off. Perfect. I saved the file to my USB and added his signature to the growing stack of statements. By the time I returned home, I had 3 signed neighbor accounts, 2 additional videos, and a sense that the tide was starting to shift. Every door I knocked on came with a whispered confession. They were scared, they were angry, and they were ready for someone else to take the first swing. Ellie met me in the driveway, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "How's the plan?" she asked, glancing at the binder under my arm. "Almost there," I said. "Tonight we finish the prep. Tomorrow we start the part they can't ignore." After dropping her off at school, I sat in my office and laid everything out. The evidence was no longer a loose collection of screenshots and anecdotes. It was a full narrative, date-stamped videos, signed witness statements, proof of unlicensed operations, financial documentation that linked Colleen Durrett directly to the fake security company. As I organized the binder, I felt that steady, familiar calm settle in. It was the same sensation I used to get before a critical field test. Every variable accounted for, every piece of data aligned, no room for error. Colleen didn't know it yet, but the story was no longer hers to control. By late afternoon, I made one final round of calls. A retired police contact confirmed that unlicensed security combined with impersonation could trigger state-level charges. The local news tip line confirmed they were very interested in any documentation of HOA misconduct, especially involving minors. I didn't hand over the binder yet, but the net was tightening. That evening, Ellie and I sat under the magnolia tree, watching the sun drop behind the rooftops. Petals drifted across the hood of the SUV, and for a moment, the house felt peaceful again. "They still might come tonight," she said softly. "Good," I replied, my voice steady. "The more they come, the harder they fall." Drop a like if you've ever turned quiet preparation into a storm, and subscribe to see how this final setup leads to the public takedown of an HOA that went too far. The final stage of my plan began at dawn. I stood in my home office, binder open, USB drive in hand, triple-checking that every piece of evidence was in perfect order. Videos of the unmarked sedans circling my home, photos of the fake uniforms, signed statements from Mrs. Ramirez, Frank, and 2 other neighbors, and finally, the smoking gun. Colleen Durrett's Family LLC tied to the phony security contract. Ellie patted in, still in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Today's the day?" she asked. "Today's the day," I said, sliding the USB into a protective case. "By the time the sun sets, this HOA is going to wish they'd never heard our name." The first stop was the local police department. I walked in, calm, binder tucked under my arm, and asked to speak to the officer handling community security complaints. 10 minutes later, I was in a small conference room with a young sergeant named Lewis. He flipped through the binder slowly, pausing at the still of Ellie on her bike while the sedan idled in the background. His jaw tightened. This is impersonation and harassment, and unlicensed security? Yeah, that's criminal. We'll open an investigation. I'm also taking this public, I said. I don't want it buried in a slow report while they keep patrolling the street. Lewis gave a nod that said he understood more than he could say out loud. You didn't hear this from me, but the moment this hits the news, we can act a lot faster. I left the station with a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in weeks. Next stop, the local news station. The same building I'd scouted a few days before now felt like the entrance to Colleen Durrett's undoing. A producer met me in the lobby. I slid the USB drive across the counter. This, I said, is a story about a homeowners association that crossed the line. They hired fake security, harassed a minor, and funneled money through a family LLC to do it. And I have video, witnesses, and documents to prove every word. Her eyes lit up the way reporters' eyes do when they smell a headline. We'll be in touch very soon, she said. When I returned to Willow Crest, the street felt charged. 2 neighbors were out trimming hedges, pretending not to watch as I parked the SUV at the very front of the driveway, chrome glinting in the sun. The magnolia tree swayed overhead, petals scattering onto the hood like a quiet blessing. That evening, the final piece slid into place. An email from the reporter hit my inbox. Story confirmed. Airing tomorrow evening, police aware. Recommend attending next HOA meeting for response. Perfect. I spent the rest of the night in preparation mode. Ellie helped me print extra copies of the timeline and the neighbors' statements. I packed a small folder for the HOA meeting, keeping the originals safe at home. This wasn't just about making Colleen squirm. It was about letting the entire neighborhood see what she really was. Around 9 p.m., like clockwork, the unmarked sedan crawled up the street. This time, I didn't hide behind curtains. I stood on the porch with my arms crossed, phone in hand, the porch light flooding the driveway. The driver hesitated, then rolled past without stopping. Ellie peeked out behind me. They're scared now, she whispered. They should be, I said, watching the taillights vanish. Because tomorrow, everyone in this neighborhood is going to know exactly what they've done. As I locked up for the night, I felt that steady, controlled calm settle over me again. This wasn't just defense anymore. This was the quiet before the public strike. The moment in a chess game when your opponent finally realizes the king is cornered and the board is yours. The night before, the HOA meeting felt like the charged silence before a storm. By the time I walked into the Willow Crest clubhouse the next evening, the place was already packed. Neighbors crowded the folding chairs, their voices low and restless. Even those who'd stayed silent for weeks now wanted to see how this all would play out. Colleen Durrett sat at the front of the room like she owned the building, a polished smile plastered across her face. Her pearl necklace gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and beside her, 2 other board members whispered like conspirators. Mark Ellison sat on the far side, shoulders stiff, hands folded tight. His eyes flicked toward me once, a silent nod of solidarity. I took a seat near the front, Ellie beside me, her chin lifted. My binder rested in my lap, heavy with evidence. I didn't need to say a word yet. "Order," Colleen said, tapping a pen against her clipboard. "We have several violations to address tonight, including ongoing non-compliance regarding—" The doors opened and a camera crew walked in. The room went silent. The reporter I'd spoken with the day before stepped forward, introducing herself briskly. "We're here to cover a developing story regarding alleged unlicensed security patrols and HOA misconduct in Willow Crest. We'll be observing the meeting." Colleen's smile faltered for the first time. She glanced at the other board members, then tried to recover. "Well, of course, all our operations are above board. We welcome transparency." A murmur rippled through the neighbors. I stood, slow and deliberate, the binder in my hands. "Above board," I said, my voice carrying. "Then maybe you can explain why 2 men in fake uniforms have been patrolling my driveway at night, harassing my 13-year-old daughter, and parking outside neighbors' homes without a single license or state bond to their name." The room erupted in whispers. Colleen tried to interject, but I held up a sheet from the binder. "This is your security services contract, signed under Durrett Family Services, LLC. No state license, no insurance, no board vote, and this," I flipped to a still image, "is the unmarked sedan parked outside my home while my daughter asks if she should call 911. The reporter's camera zoomed in on the photo. A neighbor gasped audibly. Mrs. Ramirez stood up and said loudly, "I heard them outside my window talking about making an example. We all know who ordered it." Colleen's composure cracked. That's slander. The HOA has the right to enforce—" "Enforce what?" I cut in, my voice sharper now. "By intimidating minors, by impersonating law enforcement, by funneling HOA money into your family's side business." Mark Ellison cleared his throat, his voice shaky but audible. "She's telling the truth. I've seen the payments. I signed off on them under her instruction. I was told it was standard security protocol, but it wasn't. And there was never a board vote." The room exploded. Neighbors stood up, shouting over one another. Words like illegal, resign, and call the cops ricocheted off the clubhouse walls. The reporter turned to her cameraman. "Get that," she said. Colleen tried to regain control, slamming her pen on the table. "This meeting is adjourned," she barked, but no one listened. 2 uniformed police officers entered moments later, real ones this time, and the room fell into a stunned hush. One officer spoke evenly. "We're here to follow up on a report regarding unlicensed security activity and impersonation in this neighborhood. Ms. Durrett will need to speak with you privately." The camera caught every second as she stiffened, her face pale under the lights. She glanced around the room and saw nothing but angry neighbors, folded arms, and shaking heads. Her empire had collapsed in under 10 minutes. Ellie squeezed my hand under the table. For the first time in weeks, I felt my chest lighten. This wasn't just my victory. This was the neighborhood reclaiming its dignity in real time. The room stayed frozen for a moment after the police led Colleen Durrett toward the side office, her pearl necklace catching the harsh fluorescent light as she stumbled on her own composure. A heavy silence fell over the clubhouse, broken only by the faint buzz of the camera's microphone and the shuffling of restless neighbors. For the first time since this war began, I felt my spine fully straighten. The weight wasn't gone yet, but it had shifted. Mark Ellison rose slowly from his chair, rubbing the back of his neck. I can't do this anymore," he said aloud, his voice shaking but gaining strength with each word. "I'm calling an emergency vote for board reorganization, effective immediately." The neighbors erupted into applause and shouts of agreement. Mrs. Ramirez waved a hand in the air, saying, "About time." Frank stood and added, "This board has been nothing but trouble. I vote we remove her and start over." Hands went up across the room, and within seconds, the motion carried with overwhelming support. Ellie squeezed my hand under the table. Her small voice barely reached me over the noise. "We did it, Dad." "No," I said softly, glancing at her and then at Mark, who looked like he'd shed 10 years in a single breath. "The neighborhood did it." By the time Colleen emerged from the side office with the officers, her face was ghostly. They didn't cuff her, but they spoke to her in that low, firm tone that meant the conversation was real and serious. The reporter angled her mic toward the neighbors, capturing their reactions. Anger, relief, even laughter, from some who'd been living under her shadow too long. One officer addressed the room. An official investigation is underway regarding unlicensed security activity and financial irregularities. In the meantime, Ms. Durrett is removed from any active enforcement actions. If she contacts or harasses any resident, call us immediately. The meeting dissolved into a tide of voices. Neighbors came up to me, some clapping me on the back, others murmuring thanks. Even the quietest residents, the ones who had peeked through curtains for weeks, seemed to stand a little taller now. It wasn't just about the SUV or the fines. It was about reclaiming the street from fear. When Ellie and I stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around us like a fresh start. The magnolia tree swayed gently above the driveway when we got home, its petals scattered across the hood of the vintage SUV. The house looked peaceful for the first time in months, like it had been holding its breath through all the late-night patrols and whispered threats. Ellie ran her fingers along the chrome of the SUV. "Do you think she'll come back?" I shook my head. "Not the way she used to. She's been seen now. Once the light hits people like that, they don't get to hide again." The next evening, the local news ran the story. Footage of the unmarked sedan, my daughter's trembling voice on the video, and the revelation of the Durrett Family Services LLC rolled across the screen. Comments poured into the neighborhood app, full of solidarity and apologies from those who'd been too scared to speak before. Even residents from nearby communities chimed in, sharing their own horror stories with power-hungry boards. I stood on the porch as twilight settled, feeling the hum of quiet victory in my chest. My wife's SUV gleamed in the last light, a stubborn monument to memory and defiance. I thought about the long weeks of pressure, the nights spent watching taillights disappear, and the moment in the diner when Mark finally decided to act. Every step had led to this: a neighborhood awake, a family unbroken, and a bully exposed in her own spotlight. "This street belongs to us again," I murmured, half to Ellie, half to the house itself. "And it's gonna stay that way." If you've ever had to fight to protect your home or stand up to an HOA that went too far, share your story in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. Justice feels different when it's personal, and tonight, it feels like breathing free air again.